From the very first moment he stepped into the ring, the Ultimate Warrior seemed larger than life. He was a force of nature, a living explosion of energy, a comic book hero come to life. But behind the face paint and the thunderous entrance, there was a story of pain, resilience, and unrelenting ambition. Jim Hellwig, the boy who would become the Ultimate Warrior, was not born a superstar. He was born into a small town in rural Indiana, shy, overlooked, and often lost in the shadow of a father who abandoned him at the tender age of 12. That absence would shape every choice he made for the rest of his life. As a child, Jim learned early that life could be cruel and unyielding. His father's departure left a void so deep that he could feel it in every glance from classmates, every whisper behind his back. People told him he came from nothing, that he would amount to nothing. But within that pain, Jim built an invisible protector, a fantasy hero to guide him through self-doubt and fear. He imagined a version of himself so powerful, so unstoppable, that no one could ever diminish him again. That imagination became the foundation of the warrior spirit. In the absence of parental guidance, Jim sought strength elsewhere. He gravitated to bodybuilding, idolizing the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, dreaming of sculpting a body that could match the hero he envisioned within. He transformed himself, not only physically but mentally, cultivating a philosophy of hyper-individualism. If I can channel the warrior spirit, he believed, there are no limits to what I can achieve. That single, relentless focus would drive him to extraordinary feats, but it would also plant the seeds of isolation and obsession. Jim's early years in bodybuilding were formative. He met Steve Borden, who would later become Sting, and together they explored the world of professional wrestling. But the partnership quickly dissolved. Their personalities clashed violently. Jim needed autonomy, control, and intensity, while Steve thrived on collaboration and careful planning. Their conflict was more than personal. It foreshadowed the ultimate struggle Jim would face between the limits of human cooperation and the boundless vision of his own warrior persona. By 1987, Jim Hellwig had caught the eye of Vince McMahon, the visionary owner of the World Wrestling Federation. Vince saw something unique in him, a raw energy unlike anything the wrestling world had ever witnessed. Together, they began to craft a persona that would capture the imagination of fans everywhere, the Ultimate Warrior. The transformation was dramatic. Gone were the old shoelaces and amateur face paint. In their place, a character emerged that looked as if it had leapt off the pages of a comic book, alive and unstoppable, fueled by pure adrenaline and unfiltered intensity. The creation of the Ultimate Warrior was not just physical, it was deeply psychological. Jim poured every ounce of his being into the character. The fear of mortality haunted him. His grandfathers had died young, and he feared that life might pass him by before he could leave a mark. This urgency drove him to perform with a level of intensity that few could comprehend. Every entrance, every moment in the ring, was designed to be unforgettable. The Warrior was not merely a wrestler, he was an immortal idea made flesh, a hero for a generation of fans hungry for excitement. Even as his popularity soared, the pressures behind the scenes mounted. Colleagues found him unprofessional, argumentative, and difficult to work with. His single-minded devotion to the warrior persona often alienated those around him, creating tension backstage. Yet, despite these challenges, he continued to rise. His matches were explosive, his energy unmatched, and the fans adored him. Children across America wore his t-shirts and played with action figures modeled after his likeness, connecting with the larger-than-life figure who had once been a lonely, overlooked boy. The pinnacle of his early career came at WrestleMania VI, where he faced Hulk Hogan in a match that would define him forever. The atmosphere in the arena was electric, the crowd pulsating with anticipation. Jim was no longer just a wrestler. He was a phenomenon. Every scream from the fans, every roar, every flash of color and energy was a testament to his years of relentless work, his obsession with becoming something more than human. That night, Jim Hellwig ceased to exist. The Ultimate Warrior had arrived, immortalized in the hearts and minds of millions. But behind the roar and the confetti, the boy from Indiana was still present. The pain of abandonment, the desire to be remembered, and the obsession with perfection lingered. The warrior was both a hero and a prisoner of his own creation, a man whose greatest strength was also his most isolating force. His story was far from over, and the challenges he would face in the years to come would test not only his body, but the very essence of who he was. The Ultimate Warrior had achieved immortality in the eyes of the fans, but the price of legend was only beginning to reveal itself. Fame brought adoration, but it also brought scrutiny, envy, and unrelenting pressure. How long could the warrior maintain this godlike persona before the man beneath it began to crack? And what sacrifices would he make in the relentless pursuit of being remembered forever? The story was just beginning, and the next chapter promised triumph, controversy, and a darkness that few could imagine. After WrestleMania VI, the Ultimate Warrior's star shone brighter than anyone could have imagined. Fans screamed his name, children wore his face paint, and his action figures flew off the shelves. Yet, behind the ecstatic cheers and blinding spotlight, a darker reality took shape. Fame amplified everything in Jim Hellwig's life: the insecurities, the obsession, the hyper-individualism that had fueled his rise. The same intensity that made him magnetic to fans also made him nearly impossible to work with backstage. Wrestlers who were once colleagues now viewed him as unpredictable, arrogant, and volatile, creating a growing divide between the warrior and the wrestling world he dominated. The cracks began to show almost immediately. While the Ultimate Warrior's entrance and short, explosive matches thrilled audiences, he struggled with stamina in longer bouts, exposing his inexperience in ring psychology. Opponents like Andre the Giant, who were dealing with their own physical limitations, asked for careful cooperation, only to be met with reckless intensity. One infamous match saw Andre repeatedly struck with stiff clotheslines, culminating in Andre knocking Warrior out mid-match. Such incidents became emblematic of a man who could channel unparalleled energy into performance, yet lacked empathy and collaboration, leaving a trail of frustrated and sometimes fearful colleagues in his wake. The Warrior's obsession with control extended beyond the ring. He demanded equal pay and merchandising deals comparable to Hulk Hogan's, refusing to perform if his terms weren't met. In July 1991, just before SummerSlam, he figuratively put a gun to Vince McMahon's head, threatening to no-show unless he was compensated as he saw fit. While the fans saw the unstoppable hero in the ring, backstage, he was increasingly viewed as unprofessional and volatile. His refusal to compromise, combined with a fierce belief in his own destiny, made him a liability in the eyes of wrestling executives, even as it cemented his mythic persona with the public. Controversies extended beyond business negotiations. A young fan approached him at an airport, requesting an autograph, and Warrior lashed out, humiliating the child. This incident forced Vince McMahon to intervene, requiring Warrior to film an apology video. It was a glimpse into a man whose intensity could blur the line between inspiration and recklessness, leaving a wake of misunderstanding and resentment. Even as his audience adored him, the man behind the mask was increasingly isolated, trapped in a self-constructed bubble where his ideals and reality collided violently. The loss of the WWF World Heavyweight Championship at the 1991 Royal Rumble marked a turning point. While he had achieved the pinnacle of wrestling fame, the limitations of his in-ring abilities became painfully clear. He could no longer rely solely on explosive entrances. Main event matches demanded strategy, endurance, and subtlety, areas where the Warrior struggled. The frustration of not matching the myth he had created inside the ring intensified his growing resentment. He felt underappreciated, undervalued, and misunderstood, even by Vince McMahon, the man he saw as a father figure. During this time, personal demons began to intensify. Warrior's use of multiple medications for anxiety, insomnia, and depression became increasingly necessary to cope with the pressures of fame and the stress of constant scrutiny. By late 1992, he failed a drug test amid WWF steroid trials, a public blow that he perceived as being scapegoated to protect the company's image. In response, he changed his legal name to Warrior, attempting to reclaim his identity and redefine his destiny outside the wrestling world. This was not merely a career move, it was a desperate attempt to reconcile his mythic persona with the vulnerabilities of the man behind the mask. Even as he sought creative freedom, Warrior struggled to connect with those around him. Relationships frayed, friendships dissolved, and colleagues openly criticized him. From Jake, the Snake Roberts, to Shawn Michaels, few wrestlers escaped his judgmental intensity. His worldview was rigid, often cruel, and lacking empathy. Those weaker or different were judged harshly, mirroring the judgment he had experienced in childhood. His isolation became both a defense mechanism and a prison. Despite the adoration of fans, Warrior increasingly existed in a bubble of his own making, where only his perception of destiny and greatness mattered. His attempt to reinvent himself through ventures like the Ultimate Warrior comic book series and the One Warrior Nation project revealed his persistent desire to inspire and teach. Yet, even here, the lines between ambition and obsession blurred. He sought to create a new mythology, a universe where he could channel his philosophy and reach audiences on his own terms. For a man who had grown up without guidance, these projects were therapeutic, a way to control the narrative of his life and extend his influence beyond the wrestling ring. By the mid-1990s, the Warrior returned briefly to the WWF and later to WCW, but the magic of his first run proved impossible to recreate. Colleagues remained wary, and his eccentricities, intense monologues, erratic promos, and backstage demands kept him on the fringes of mainstream success. The man who had been immortalized in WrestleMania history now struggled to maintain relevance, his larger-than-life persona colliding with the reality of aging, physical limitations, and personal demons. The same intensity that had made him legendary also contributed to his decline. Isolation became both a choice and a curse. Warrior retreated from social interactions, preferring his own company and the mythology he created. He rarely participated in the locker room camaraderie and insisted on private spaces to maintain his persona. Friends and colleagues often found him unapproachable, yet he remained a figure of fascination and inspiration for fans, a paradoxical blend of admiration and alienation. The dichotomy of his life, hero to the public, controversial loner to the private world, defined the next chapter of his story. After years of controversy, isolation, and estrangement from many of his peers, the Ultimate Warrior sought a path toward reconciliation and purpose. The man who had once demanded perfection and challenged everyone around him now faced the challenge of reconciling with the life he had lived. It began quietly, through personal reflection and the recognition that his intensity, once his greatest strength, had also been his greatest flaw. Warrior began to repair relationships, starting with those closest to him. Reaching out to old friends, former colleagues, and even adversaries, he attempted to close the gaps left by years of pride and stubbornness. This was a man who, for the first time, confronted the consequences of his actions, both in the ring and in life. One of the most poignant reconciliations came with Hulk Hogan, the man who had passed the torch to him at WrestleMania VI. Decades of tension, resentment, and rivalry melted away in private conversations and heartfelt apologies. "I'm sorry for all the bad stuff, man," Warrior said, setting aside ego and pride. Hogan, in turn, acknowledged the apology, recognizing the courage it took for Warrior to admit past mistakes. These reconciliations were not only symbolic, they marked a transformation in a man who had spent much of his life as a solitary, uncompromising force. The Warrior, once the embodiment of chaos and unpredictability, began to reveal vulnerability, humility, and humanity. In 2014, the Ultimate Warrior returned to WWE one last time, this time to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. The journey to this moment had been long and fraught with obstacles, both personal and professional. Many believed he was undeserving, others feared his presence might reignite old controversies. But Warrior approached the induction with sincerity, stepping into the arena as both a legend and a man seeking peace. Walking the backstage corridors, past scowls and turned backs, he faced the judgment of those he had once alienated. Yet, through it all, he remained steadfast, prepared to claim the recognition he had earned, not just as a performer, but as a human being who had learned, struggled, and survived. The Hall of Fame induction became a moment of redemption. Warrior spoke with passion and conviction, sharing the lessons he had learned from his extraordinary life. He spoke of destiny, of the importance of perseverance, and of the need to believe in one's inner strength. For those who had admired him as a superhero in the 1990s, it was a chance to see the man behind the mask. Not flawless, but real, reflective, and deeply committed to inspiring others. Fans felt the energy, the raw intensity that had always defined him, now tempered by wisdom and perspective. It was a culmination of decades of triumphs, mistakes, and growth, all converging into a single moment of closure. Tragically, fate would not allow the Ultimate Warrior to linger in this newfound peace. 2 days after his Hall of Fame induction, he appeared on Monday Night Raw, delivering a final speech to a new generation of fans. In it, he encouraged viewers to believe in themselves, to harness their inner strength, and to pursue their own destinies with courage and determination. His message was clear: life is fleeting, but the spirit endures. That night, millions witnessed the energy, the charisma, and the inspiration that had defined his life. Few could have imagined it would be his last performance. Around 12 hours after leaving his hotel room the next morning, the Ultimate Warrior suffered a sudden heart attack. The man who had inspired millions, who had carried a comic book hero to life, who had faced the darkness of his own mind and personal demons, passed away quietly, leaving behind a complex legacy. His death was tragic in its timing. It came at a moment when he had found reconciliation, peace, and recognition. Yet, in true warrior fashion, he departed on his own terms, defiant, unyielding, and still larger than life. In the years following his death, WWE established the Warrior Award, honoring individuals who demonstrate strength, courage, and compassion. While the man himself had been controversial and often lacking in empathy, the award sought to recognize the values that his fans cherished: the enduring spirit, the resilience, and the belief in personal destiny. Warrior's life remained a paradox: brilliant yet flawed, inspirational yet contentious. He left behind a legacy of energy, myth, and motivation, proving that even a complicated life can leave a lasting, meaningful impact. Ultimately, Jim Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior, was remembered not just as a wrestler, but as a symbol of intensity, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. He embodied the paradox of human ambition, a man capable of immense inspiration and equally immense controversy. Through his triumphs, failures, reconciliations, and final moments, the warrior's story endures as a cautionary yet motivating tale, a reminder that the human spirit can be as powerful, unpredictable, and unforgettable as any comic book hero brought to life.